Once foreign people start dying for Israel, that's the end of U.S.-Israel relations. We don't want any American dying for Israel. They clearly want American weapons. They want American aid.
But they wanted to help. But they wanted to help themselves. David Makovsky from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. You're a senior fellow there, but you've been involved at the State Department, with The Hill, as a journalist for so long with issues relating to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you for joining us to talk about
Delighted to be with you, David.
The Six-Day War was a six-day war. It is one of the few conflicts that isn't named something different everywhere. Talk a little about it.
Look, the run-up to the war was fascinating because there's so much lessons that you could really take from that whole month leading to war. And the debate still rages. How much of it was a miscalculation? How much of it was inevitable? You know, you could wonder in your mind, you know, if the Soviets didn't plant false information that Israel was about to attack Syria, and then gave that information to the Egyptians, would Nasser have brought troops into the Sinai? Would he have kicked out the UN emergency force right there? Would he have closed the straits? But once he closed the straits, what you realize is that in certain ways, the run-up to the Six-Day War even goes back to 1956 and the Suez Crisis and its aftermath.
So let's talk as if this is new to us. The '56 conflict is very much a piece with history, because the United States is not on Israel's side.
Right. With Eisenhower in '56, he is trying to get Arab nationalists on America's side. And he feels what the Brits and the French and the Israelis have done by taking Suez, the Suez Canal, they will ensure that the Arab nationalists and their new charismatic leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, sides with the Soviets. So he's determined to push back on that. Now, one of the pieces of this is the waterway leading up to Israel, that Nasser had closed what's called the Straits of Tiran, that goes all the way up to Israel's southern port of Aqaba. And he says, look, you just got to get out of everywhere. You got to get out of the Sinai. You got to get off the Suez Canal. And we got to hope that he doesn't do it again. And I'm even going to sign an aide-de-memoire diplomatic speak that says he shouldn't do it again, and if he does it again, the United States will open the canal. And the Israelis take the President of the United States seriously. Now, what's happened also is that Israel has cultivated a quiet relationship with the Shah of Iran, also something very historical. And Israel's getting all of its oil through that place. So when Nasser cuts off the straits again in May of 1967, 50 years ago this month, what happens is that Israel said, we can't afford the straits to be closed. And because all our oil, that's our lifeline. And we got a promise from the United States of America. Now, the only thing is that Eisenhower doesn't fully bring the Johnson team, or the Johnson team is so preoccupied in Vietnam, they don't exactly know what Eisenhower agreed to. And they go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to say,
where Ike lives at this point.
Where Ike lives in retirement. And what's the deal, And he said, to find out what was the commitment. But the Israelis think they have a commitment. Now, look at how the changing world impacts this one crisis. It's fascinating. So Eshkol is this prime minister. He's like the antithetical Israeli prime minister to a certain land. Like if the new Sabra, the new native-born Israeli, very confident, has some swagger. Eshkol is the old Eastern European Jew. He speaks Hebrew with a Yiddish accent. And all these generals are saying, there's going to be war with Nasser. He's closed the straits. He's brought in troops into the Sinai. There's going to be a war. We need some surprise. We mobilize the country. The whole economy comes to a standstill. There's this young chief of staff named Yitzhak Rabin. And he says, what are we waiting for? Eshkol says, America, 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 America. We don't move without America. Let's see if we could stave off this war. He single-handedly holds off the generals. By the way, he's the defense minister too, which created its own crisis because he didn't seem like the defense minister type, and he's actually replaced by this guy with an eye patch.
That
2
guy.
days, named Moshe Dayan. 2 days before the war, because he gives a speech in Yiddish and he kind of gumbles it and mumbles it, and people said, oh no, this isn't good. But anyway, Eshkol is holding off the generals. And he said, if America makes a promise, America's commitment's got to be worth something. So he sends this very eloquent foreign minister of his named Abba Eban and says, go, tell them they made a commitment. It wasn't just Eisenhower, it was really the world in many ways. Go to de Gaulle, go to the Brits, and go to the United States, go to the White House. So that's what, Eban does. Eban said, but you made a commitment. And he said, yeah, that was 1957, now it's 1967. I think that sentence seared into the Israeli consciousness this idea of the futility of international guarantees. You had Menachem Begin would subsequently say, there is no guarantee to guarantee a guarantee. And Eban, who puts his faith in the United States, basically, and is the leader and is with Eshkol and trying to stave off war and say, well, America made a commitment. And basically, they see these international guarantees as useless. And I think as someone who was actually in the State Department during the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, the ghosts of 67 always hovered, because if you would say, well, what about guarantees? I would look around and say, like, the Israelis still remember 67.
But I mean, to be fair, jumping forward, the Israelis got a guarantee from George W. Bush that Barack Obama basically said,
Right. That was a letter. That was a letter.
But
this wasn't even, but this is like even coming, to Israel's aid at war. Basically, no one's willing to open up the straits. And then Eshkol realizes this is war, but then he has this insight. And he says, you know what, I'm going to send a second guy to Washington, but we're going to ask a different question. We're not going to ask, how do we avoid war? We're going to ask, what does the U.S. do if Israel goes to war? Sends a guy named Meir Amit, the head of the Mossad. And he meets with his Pentagon people and then his CIA and all that. And what's fascinating is a split-screen reality of 67. The public in Israel thinks there's going to be a second Holocaust. The central park of Israel is a place called Park HaYarkon in Tel Aviv. And people are digging mass graves. They're convinced a second Holocaust is coming, that all the Arabs, Nasser says he's going to push Israel into the sea. He's going to liquidate Israel. I mean, he doesn't mince words. So having tried to hold off the generals to secure this American commitment, based on what Eisenhower said in March of 1957 as a way to get Israel out, Amit says, okay, what's your assessment? He goes, the Pentagon, CIA, I'll say, you're going to win big. Our assessment is that the military thing is stacked for you. They're right. They got it right. I don't know if they say 6 days, you're going to triple the size of the country, but they said you're going to win.
Yeah.
And Amit basically comes back and says, if Israel goes to war, the U.S. isn't going to confront Israel on the high seas or not going to shoot down Israeli planes or anything like that. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating month. But what sears into the consciousness of Israelis is these international commitments are worthless.
And people think about this in the context of guarantees, back then. But of course, a big element of efforts towards the peace process has been this notion that if we can just offer Israel a sense of security, vis-a-vis certain parties, then we can really make them feel the confidence to be able to make the concessions necessary. And what you're really saying is, no, having gone through this, Israel is just not going to accept it. And Israel, of course, has never been willing to accept a formal security guarantee from the United States.
That's right.
Never.
That's right. And that's what really I think is this turning moment in the Zionist history, is that it really deepens this ethos of self-reliance. And that Israel believes it's a moral point, too, that no foreign country should die for Israel. Israelis should die for Israel. Because they really fear. It's remarkable. I mean, you talk to their leaders, they say it. Once foreign people start dying for Israel, that's the end of U.S.-Israel relations. We don't want any American dying for Israel. It's a remarkable. They clearly want American weapons. They want American aid.
But they wanted to help. But they wanted to help themselves. You
Right.
know. But I think a lot of people think this comes from the Holocaust, and this is perhaps one of the unexplored, certainly for us in
Right.
in these moments, unexplored aspects of this is that you've spent so much time in Israel. I'm also very familiar with Israel. Israel, in the mind's eye of the outside world, is a country that was created in the aftermath of the Holocaust and is in many ways for the West an expiation of the Holocaust, even though for Israelis
Right.
it never was.
Right.
To the contrary,
Right.
Israelis
Right.
in Israel, Ashkenazis have contempt for people who lived through the Holocaust because they weren't smart enough to be Zionists and come. And so we think of this, and then suddenly we have this war. And in some ways, the '67 war is so much more formative of the Israeli modern state, the Israeli consciousness, the Israeli relationship with the outside world than the Holocaust ever was.
Yeah.
This is
Right.
interesting.
No, it's fascinating. Look, when President Obama gave a speech in Cairo and kind of suggested that Israel's right to a state seemed to derive from the Holocaust, I think that had a bigger impact than him not visiting Israel at that time.
Because they were offended?
Because they were offended, because their view is their history to that connection to that land goes back thousands of years. Now, he corrected the record, but that was a key moment. Israel doesn't believe if there was no Holocaust, there would be no Israel. Israel believes if there was an Israel, there might not have been a Holocaust. If they could have defended themselves in the 30s. But anyway, but look, there's no questioning also the impact this war had on the Arab psyche. I would say
Right.
until the Arab Spring of 2011, in many ways you feel the Arabs were living in the seventh day of the Six-Day War. They were just this sense of paralysis, inertia, humiliation. Here was Nasser, who was, the whole idea of pan-Arabism was riding high, and it's just shatters with 67.
And in such a humiliating
way.
fashion.
I mean, Israel's attack on the Egyptian Air Force to start the war just meant they control the skies. And
So they control the skies. They take out the Syrian Air Force in less than a day.
Right.
They take the West Bank. They
Right.
take Jerusalem.
Right.
We've said this in our conversations about the Six-Day War more than once, that the Arabs recognize that the state of Israel is now here to stay, and not only that, but they can kick the crap out of us, to use the term of art. Why does the '73 war happen then?
Anwar Sadat, who was seen as a lightweight, an interim figure, that Nasser wanted as a vice president because no one would think that he was a competitor to the great Nasser. And he comes along and he says, you know what? Ultimately, the Soviets, they're good at getting us to war, but they can't get us to peace because America and Israel, they've got the cards. And America has the relationship with Israel. But his insight was, if I cross the canal, just cross the Suez Canal, I've shattered the status quo. I've regained the dignity, and then I could go for peace. But basically, Sadat does make one blunder, in my view. He's knocking Israeli planes out of the sky. And he crosses the canal, but then he says, I'll do a little more. Now, he wasn't going to Tel Aviv, but he did have a Soviet airlift going. Kissinger in '73 is thinking détente, that I had just cut this deal with the Soviets. I'm not going to intervene in a massive way if they don't, which wasn't easy for Kissinger, who felt closely to Israel. And, they're always thinking the last war, the Israelis will win, they'll push them back. So in the beginning, he thinks, well, maybe it won't have much of a cost anyway. Then he sees, well, maybe there is a value of ending this war with Egypt getting a limited victory. Diplomatically, they cross the canal, have a Security Council resolution, lock in the status quo, start the diplomacy from a place that the Egyptians can say, I crossed the canal. Except Sadat complicates it, and he's got this Soviet airlift. Kissinger hears about this, and he goes, what? He goes, I did not intervene because I wanted to preserve détente, but I don't want the Soviet Union. They'll claim victory. They're the ones who brought you across the canal. It'll be because of them? No way. Then he turns it on, And then the tide of the war changes.
And Israel gets to the gates of Cairo.
Right, gates of Cairo, gates of Damascus. Everything changes. But it was, you have to look at the superpower competition.
So maybe the lesson wasn't really learned as much until 73.
Right.
Is that fair?
I think what happens then after 73 is that they do feel there's a value. If we could flip Sadat, if we could get Egypt squarely on America's side. And that's what happens. These two disengagement agreements of Kissinger really set the predicate for this historic, electrifying moment of the second half of the 20th century. Sadat's getting on an airplane, flying to Israel. By the way, the guy who didn't like this, sadly, I say this very sadly, was a guy by the name of Jimmy Carter, who's now the president. He has this idea that there's going to be a grand Geneva peace conference, and I'm going to get the Syrians there, and I'm going to get all these players there, and we're going to have one big comprehensive peace. Sadat says, this is no good. This is no good.
Because he knows the Syrians.
He knows the Syrians are an ally of the Soviets. They are not serious. And so I think Sadat goes to Jerusalem to preempt Carter, who had just announced with the Soviets in October 77 that they're going to have a joint approach to this with a joint major peace conference. And Sadat understands this isn't going nowhere. I got to go on my own. And he writes Carter a letter. Don't do this. Let me go on my own. And he goes on his own. Carter was not happy. The United States was basically silent for like the first week after this electrifying moment because Carter thinks he's destroying my plans. But then, to be fair to Carter, once it's in full swing at Camp David, it's a different thing.
So we have the moment. So we have the 6 Day War. This changes Israel, and it turns Israel into the country that we know today. Right. It changes the Arabs because it changes them into the countries, at least vis-a-vis Israel. We don't want to overdo it. That we know today, countries that don't feel like they can win in combat with Israel. And no Arab country takes on Israel from then on. Right.
And Egypt believes that it's got to look out for its own national interests. It's not just a pan-Arabist thing from Nasser. Sadat says, look, we fought for the Palestinians in 48, 56, 67, a war of attrition, 68, 70, 73. That's enough. We want our land.
So one last effort in 73 after 67, and then they're done.
Right.
Okay.
And without Egypt, there's no Arab war coalition.
Right. And Egypt is still the big man on campus in terms of the Arab world at this point, which it no longer is now. Okay. So we've got this scenario, this and fraught drama. The United States is now in the Israeli camp. It has come down on the Israeli side. Everybody identifies the United States as part of this. Okay, but now Israel, as the West Bank, and what? This also changes Israel, totally. Right? Because yes, it's true. It's no longer this country that people confuse with a country that had to be born out of the Holocaust. It's an independent country. It's a Zionist, proud, very forceful country. Right? But it's also an occupying power, and it's got all these people. And it doubles their size. It takes back Jerusalem. That also changes Israel. So what happens?
Well, there's a secret cabinet meeting right after the 6 Day War where...
In America?
In Israel.
In Israel.
And they say, if we get peace with Syria, we give up the Golan. If we get peace with Egypt, we give up the Sinai. But the West Bank has a much more biblical resonance. And in East Jerusalem, you know, the idea of was after 2,000 years since, you know, the last Jewish Commonwealth, it is overwhelming, and Israel annexes Jerusalem.
Even though these people aren't religious Jews, even though they're not messianic in any way,
not at all.
It's still got this power.
Right, the power of nationalism,
destiny,
peoplehood, a rendezvous with destiny, all these things.
Right.
It divides the country.
And it still divides the country.
To this day, the access points of Israeli politics largely turn on this issue. In other words, in America, when we say he's right of center or left of center, that means, we have a certain view on either side of what is the role of government in society, of taxation, what's the right amount, on social policy, a social conservative, social liberal. I mean, we can, all these access points in America don't translate there. I mean, many don't. I shouldn't say none, but and there was opportunities that were missed. Yeah, right.
Right. It's not just the Palestinians who missed opportunities.
Right.
It's that the famous quote from
Abba
Iban's
famous line that they never miss an opportunity, miss an opportunity. Israel misses an opportunity too. I mean, Jordan was, I've talked to a bunch of these generals and I say, what is the biggest moment missed? They'll say 1987, because there was a chance to give Jordan to give
the West Bank back to Jordan.
Right.
And in 1988, King Hussein gives up. I don't want this
July
anymore.
1st, 1988.
Good luck with that.
Good luck, you're on your own.
And of course, this continues to roil Israeli politics,
absolutely.
Israeli relations with the United States.
Right.
Now, interestingly, of course, it also roils Israeli relations with the Arab world. And this is one of the most interesting things since the Arab Spring, but I would say more since more since Iran has become such an expeditionary power, less the Arab Spring, more about Iran, that the Arab countries basically have, in the 21st century, taken the reality of 1967. Yes, you can beat us. Yes, you're here to stay. Yes, we know it. But rhetorically, we're always going to stand with the Palestinians. We're not going to do much, but we're going to stand with the Palestinians. We're never going to go to war for the Palestinians again. But we're going to stand with you. First of all, the Palestinians stand with Saddam Hussein when he invades Kuwait, and this is a shockwave through the Gulf.
Right.
Then we have the rise of Iran and the sense that this is the real problem. And who's standing against Iran? It's not the Palestinians, because Hamas is ranged with them. It's the Israelis. Right. So we have an upending of that status quo that was created 50 years ago in this century.
That's right. I think in many ways, that's why I say, I think after the Arab Spring, and certainly you're right to put the focus on Iran, that's where I feel we've finally out from under the seventh day of the Six-Day War. The Arabs have other issues.
So now we're on the eighth day.
We're on the eighth day.
We're on the eighth day.
And the Arabs states say, you know what, Israel could be part of a solution here. They're not just part of a problem.
Okay, so here's the question. And I don't want the Palestinians to be a prop here. For the Arabs, the Palestinians have been a prop since 67, in reality, maybe since 73, although we can argue that wasn't about them. Now they don't even mouth platitudes about this. It's just an afterthought, if that. But of course, these are real people.
Of course,
they have real challenges. They have real hopes and dreams.
Absolutely. This is where I think we have a split screen reality, is that what you point out is accurate, is that there's this strategic convergence under the table with Israel and its neighboring Sunni states, that they're worried about Iran being able to segue from this nuclear deal to having hegemonic aspirations in the region, and what this means for Sunni Arabs, given the enmity between the Shia Iran and Sunni Arabs historically. So this has really galvanized them. We could joke and say, President Obama turns out to be the greatest unifier of Arabs and Israelis.
That's true.
Because of the nuclear deal. Whatever it is. And to be fair to the president, I think that, there are elements of the nuclear deal that are important, but there are the sunset issues that are not resolved. Okay? So basically, you've got a split screen where there's a commonality of threats. The fear of Iran, the fear of jihadi groups, like ISIS and things like that. ISIS in the Sinai, Hamas also in Gaza.
The Muslim Brotherhood.
The Brotherhood, that all these countries. I mean, if you look at the 2014 war in Gaza, the Arab states, they don't see them as just pietistic Muslims anymore. They see them as they are destabilizing. We have this problem in our countries too. And they felt that way in 2006 with the Hezbollah war. They find that way with 2008. But the pictures of Al Jazeera are powerful, and they back away. By 2014, they're not backing away. And Egypt is leading the harder line. No breaks for these people of Hamas. So you've got, on one hand, this convergence under the table. But what you were hinting at before, which is, I think, above the table, there's a nervousness, a little bit of, we don't want to be breaking ranks publicly. So whatever we do under the table is okay. There's this quote from Pardo, Tamir Pardo in the Israeli press, that he tells Netanyahu, the former head of the Mossad, says, Israel's become the mistress of the Middle East. Everyone wants to be with us, just not publicly. So what you've got is this split screen where there's more of the strategic convergence with the Sunni neighbors in Israel, but yet they're not ready to open up an Israeli embassy with a flag in Riyadh.
Exactly. But this is again, this is the history. This is the post-World War II history. This is not 67. This is just the. This is the education system. I hate to come back to something so nerdy. This is the education system and the rhetoric of the Arab world, which is, for the last 70 years, we've been saying Israel's the enemy, Israel's a cancer in the heart of the Middle East, Israel is doing nothing but oppressing the Palestinians, and by the way, they're on their way to doing even worse things. And we could detail even more outrageous rhetoric. This is still an integral part of the education system throughout the Arab world. All of a sudden, you turn around and you say, we've been saying 2 + 2 is 4 for the last 70 years, but you know what? It's 5. Believe me, it's good. And people may be quiescent, but they're not that quiescent. This is going to be a process. This is going to be a process for Israel. What I see, though...
That's why it's still more under the table.
Yes, but what I see, and you tell me if we're wrong, is somehow an inexorable process from 1967 in which Palestinian fortunes decline, sometimes slowly, sometimes faster, and sometimes at breakneck speed, as over the last decade or so. And as you look at it, you were involved with the negotiations, with the discussions. We talk about a partnership for peace, and we talk about conditions for peace. 50 years later, are they there, or were they more there in 1968?
Well, look, here's what is changed for the better. And this is why I think there is, I don't know if you say it's a trajectory of history, but look, Israel is certainly better off from where it was in 67. It got peace with Egypt, peace with Jordan. I did a back of the envelope thinking, if Israel's GNP hit 50%, according to U.S. figures, in the 74, after the 73 war, went to military spending.
Wow.
Okay, 50%. That would mean, in today's GDP terms, $150 billion should be Israel's defense budget in today's terms. Today's Israel's defense budget is 15 to 18 billion.
So 10% of that.
Right, 10% of that. And it's really like 5% overall. So the fact that, as you pointed out correctly, 73 is the last Arab interstate war, has meant, so between 150 and 18, where's that delta going? It's going to improve quality of life. Schools, clinics, universities, all Israel.
In Israel.
Right, in Israel. Here, I think the good thing is, and you and I might have a respectful difference of opinion of Oslo about 93, the secret talks, but I think the fact that the Palestinians could run their own affairs in every Palestinian city of the West Bank was good for the most part, because if the Palestinian national movement collapses, I think you're going to see more of a clamor for one person, one vote there. And I think that's what Israel doesn't want. Israel wants to be a Jewish state and a democracy. Those are the twin wings of the Zionist aircraft. So I think that Israel doesn't want to see the Palestinian national movement collapse.
Israel has a stake in Palestinian success.
Right.
They haven't always worked in that direction.
Right.
But I think there's a broad recognition that at the heart of Palestinian failure is this lack of governance, this lack of institutions, and that's not getting better. And this is the irony, isn't it?
No. Well, look, you had a guy like Yasser Arafat who yelled jihad, who led his people to a self-destructive intifada, 2000, 2004. Many more Palestinians killed than Israelis. His economy was in ruins. I mean, it gave them nothing. And at least you got a leader now who basically thinks violence is self-destructive for Palestinians. He's no Arafat, and in that way, he's not up to what's needed. He's not up to what's needed. Believe me,
This is fundamentally the story of Israel and the Palestinians, is that Israel is successful enough, compelling enough, and the region has changed enough, and the global environment has changed enough, that in fact the Palestinians have become an afterthought, and that the things that they do to call attention to themselves and their plight involve violence, which are fraught with risk for them as much as for everybody. This is a tragedy. This is a tragedy for them and for the Middle East. What do you think?
No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I agree with that.
50 years from now.
Where are we?
Where are we? Because no one would have said in 1967 that 50 years from now we'd still be essentially where we are today, at least territorially.
Yeah, look, I do believe, look, here's why. You could say you keep doing, why you get up in the morning, you're a professional optimist. I do think that Israel and the Palestinian Authority has something in common, a strategic interest, is they don't want Hamas or these jihadi groups to take over. That's common to both of them. And I have to believe that that commonality of threat is going to be able to find a way to solve this issue. Now, will it solve it at once? I can't predict that. I don't think so.
There was a huge inflection point in the Middle East in 1967. Do you think there's going to be another huge inflection point?
Oh, that I hope there's not another war. And but look, let's be humble. In 1967, no one predicted Sadat going to Jerusalem 12 years later.
There
no
you
one
go.
predicted Egypt-Israel peace treaty 14 years later. No one predicted the Jordan-Israel peace treaty. No one predicted that Israel and the Palestinian national movement would shake hands and set up a coexistence. None of these things were predicted. Let's be humble. That we don't know for sure, and therefore you want to do sound policies, which is curb radicalism, promote economic opportunity, see where you build institutions. What I wish for the Palestinians, and I'll end on this point, is a story I heard from Salam Fayyad. And by the way, his numbers were good on the Palestinian side because they saw him when it came to governance, that he was actually producing. He said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, look, I'm probably the only Palestinian who reads Zionist history at night. And what do I read? I read that between 1917 and 1947, from the Balfour Declaration, which is when the British recognized the idea of a Jewish homeland, and the UN partition, which is 2 states, November 29, 1947, Israel built the country. They built that state through institutions, and he didn't know the Hebrew names, he said, but they built that university, right? I said, yeah, Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He goes, they built that hospital, right? I said, Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. He goes, yeah. He goes, they built the proto-government. I said, yeah, the Jewish agency. He goes, they built the trade union. I said, the Histadrut. They built the sick fund, right? The Kupat Cholim, which is the sick fund. And when we went through, he goes, so you know what he said? My conclusion is, by the time they declared the state, they'd already built it. That's what we got to do. So what I wish the Palestinians is that they read some Zionist history and do more institution building, governance, bottom up. That, I think, is a sure footing. I would not want any cataclysmic wars here. I hope that's in the past. But I just think we have to be humble. In 67, we didn't know these grand predictions.
We should be surprised in a good way. We have been in the Middle East. We tend to forget that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, folks. This is the end of our Viewpoint series on the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War. Thanks for watching. As always, let us know what other topics you'd like AEI scholars to cover on Viewpoint, and be sure to check out the rest of our videos and research from AEI.